So, one of the distinguishing features of our time is a focus on facts. Reliable facts, facts that allow prediction and so on. And so medical science has developed enormously, which allows all sorts of life-saving procedures which are amazing, and they're based on very precise understandings of anatomy, metabolism, and so on. And they allow professional people to do things to our body and for our body. We can be very grateful for that capacity, but it operates in a quite a dualistic modality in which the body exists as a thing and the doctor can do things to the body, and in many ways you're not really involved. You should sort of not interrupt the process too much. Tibetan approach is very, very different. A lot of the explanation is given in the form of metaphors, and the metaphors speak to the movement of our, if you like, the immediacy of our life. So, for example, we have the notion of the 5 elements. That was an idea that was operating in Western Europe pretty much up until the Enlightenment, and then with the rise of modern science, it's not something to be taught in a medical school at all, but it would be still used in a school of Chinese medicine or acupuncture. So it's a way of thinking about the balancing of the energies which we manifest as our body. So if you're used to thinking of a Western anatomical or medical body, you have to make quite a shift to thinking about, not about bones and marrow and blood as having many, many variations and many forms, each of which need an analysis. Western science goes into ever-increasing particularity of attention, ever-increasing more finessed and precise definitions of what is occurring. Whereas an understanding through the 5 elements is much more a gathering together and a subsuming of different categories of experience inside a particular frame. So we have earth, water, fire, wind, and space. And everything that occurs can be located inside these. Now, clearly in terms of medical treatment, having a lot of precise analysis is very useful. You give blood samples, urine samples, and so on, and these are analyzed across a wide spectrum of pathways of inquiry. Diversification. When we look in terms of these 5 elements, we're wanting to hold on to the idea that diversity is contained within the 5, and then the 5 in the 1, and then the 1 into nothing. So if you think of the beginning of the human being, there is a space. The space at the beginning of the womb, and in this space you have the ripening of the female essence or the egg, and you have the arrival through the spermatozoa coming up, and then you have this third function of the consciousness, and these 3 meet, and they meet in a space, and as soon as they meet, you start to have the development of the patterning of the 5 elements, which ripens and becomes more and more complicated, and the development of the spine and the head, which is down, starts to rise. I mean, you can see the whole development of the fetus. And then the baby comes out into the world, and there is skin, and inside the skin there is soft material, which will develop more into muscles later with usage, and bones, which are at first quite soft and pliable and gradually take on more rigidity. So, the 5 elements develop through the course of our lives, but as we get older, they start to dissolve. Now, in the Tibetan understanding, there are an outer set of 5 elements and an inner set of 5 elements. The inner ones are the kind of energetic receptors of the energy of the mind, or it's how the energy of the mind shows itself as a harmonic or a site of fitting with the outer form of the 5 elements. So we have the outer form of the 5 elements. Earth would be the bones of the body, which are hard. The more subtle mental formation would be rigidity, holding things in place, having a sense of determinism. Now, clearly, if you've ever broken your leg or even twisted your ankle, you know what it's like to have an interrupted sense of your own solidity. When you're young and healthy and you can run around, it's almost like you have an indestructible body. You know, you can hurl it up a tree and start climbing and run down hills and leap over things because here you are. And then you get hurt and you're hurtling along and everything's tightening up and you're not so strong at all. So there you see how the earth element gets compromised. So that if the outer earth element is affected, the strength and sense of stamina in the corresponding mental aspect of it also gets wobbled. Does that make sense? So as we move towards the death process, you get a gradual collapsing of the outer forms of the elements into the more subtle forms, which then dissolve into space. So if someone is not dying in an accident, but with old age, as they move towards death, usually they really want to lie down. They're in bed. They're not getting up because the body feels very heavy. This is the collapsing of the earth element, that the strength of the bone structure in relation to the muscles starts to collapse. And so the body's just a heaviness. Then the earth collapses into water, and the fluidity of ease of movement and facial expression goes down. Then water into fire, which is interest and enthusiasm. In my experience of being with people who are dying, they're usually not expressing much interest. They're kind of looking with these large vacant eyes, and they can hear what people are saying, but the time for, connectivity is going down, and that then expresses itself with as the fire element goes into the wind element, speech stops, breath becomes very slight, and then the breath element, the wind element goes into space, and it's at that point that the wind, as the vehicle or the carrier of the life energy, is dispersed in space and the body moves towards death. Now, consciousness, mental consciousness, the most subtle formation of dualistic presence, is carried on the wind into the dissolving in space. So it becomes almost like very, very fine particles. Like on a summer's day, if you see a shaft of light shining in the window and you suddenly see how much dust there is in your house. It's just floating. So there's a kind of dispersal, and at that point you go into the Bardo. So clearly the most important thing is that we allow the fading of ourselves. So all the meditation that we've been doing is focused on releasing fixation, seeing the impermanence, and allowing life to happen as it does. It's not about mastery. So now we're in a time of fading. It's like being very, very tired. You might feel like getting up and you think, oh, I can't. You just slump back. The energy is sinking, and therefore mobilization is impossible. So that, taken it to its ultimate degree, is what death is. It's a fading away of the energy which was available in this life, and so the body is no longer mobilized and it becomes a corpse. So it's not about in our daily life preparing for death by becoming completely passive and reactive and being blown hither and thither by life. It's much more to see that energy is something passing through. It's a bit like we have in this building the electric current that comes in from the mains and then is distributed through the building to the various plugs and switches. So the electricity comes through, and if you plug a little lamp into it and switch it on, you get light from that lamp. The lamp is shining, but it's shining with the power that's come through the electricity supply. So the energy of our life is the energy of the universe, or the energy of the ground, which for a brief period of time is plugged into this body. And then when this body gets unplugged, the power's not coming through and this body's just a piece of dead meat. But as long as we're plugged in and the flow of light is coming, we have light in our eyes, we speak, we breathe, we connect. So if we see that looking at the notion of participation we had before, if we see that our participation in the world, our being part of the world, is our access to the energy of the world. That it's not me being healthy, but it's my capacity to relate to the energy of the world. It's life's energy. And therefore, as I move towards death, life's energy fades away. Now, if I take a very personal reading, I am dying. So we've had these two aspects of who I am. I am the mirror. I am the open awareness. This doesn't die, because that mirror or that showing or that basic awareness is present in death. So you're present as you die. Who is dying? The patterning of the ego. So just as our body has a pattern in our life, depending on our inheritance through our mother and father, depending on the kind of food that was available when we were young, depending on the amount of exercise we've had and so on, our body has a particular pattern. Our mental energy also has a particular patterning. Some people have a lot of rigidity in their mental structure. So the earth element is very privileged. And if somebody is very dogmatic and judgmental, the privileging of earth usually means a diminution of space. They're not very spacious and easygoing. So the three moving elements of water, fire and wind are restricted by the tilt towards earth. Does that make sense? Other people are very kind of slightly hysterical and kind of wind and fire and react very quickly to things. Oh my goodness. And they almost seek to excite themselves more. And that's a pattern we understand. So when you look around at people, you can see that this, whatever we call it, metaphor or symbolism of the 5 elements is quite a good way of seeing this. What we call this person is manifesting this patterning of the 5 elements. So the personhood, John is like this, that's like the cherry on the cake. you don't eat a cake just to get the cherry. You don't really need the cherry. You can have the cake without the cherry, because you don't need the final conclusion. John is like this, because actually John is the showing of this pattern. Yeah? Oh, we can probably all remember different stages of our lives where the balance of these elements was different. So, when I was a teenager, a young teenager, I was very anxious, very socially anxious. I was very avoidant of social situations. I spent most of my free time swimming. I went to the baths 5, 6, 7 times a week. Or I'd be out on my bicycle out in the countryside. I really didn't like people too much. So that was a very kind of... I liked the water element, because you could just sort of scoosh through it and do length after length after length, or swim in the sea. It's a kind of unobstructed movement of yourself. And then when I would encounter other people, I think, well, what do you do with other people? Because they're kind of over there and they're looking at me, and what do they want from me, and I don't know what to do, and I'll just go swimming instead. So after a while that shifted, and the balance of the elements shifted in me, and being with other people got easier, because the fear of, if I'm with others, there's something that's expected or something to be done. I couldn't quite clock what it was. Of course, other people are always showing us roughly what they're up for. But when you're retroflecting, when you're turned back into yourself and you're trying to work it out inside yourself, it's a great mystery. This is very common in the psychology of teenage boys. In the hospital over the years, you saw so many young men who wouldn't get out of their bedroom, and they'd have to be driven. Very often the whole family would bring them to the clinic, and they would be saying, but I don't want to see anyone, I don't want to do anything. Well, you have to do things, you have to go out in the world. Your mum doesn't want you around all the time. But I don't know what to do. Well, just follow the cues that other people give you. But they wouldn't like me. You know, and you get this kind of stubborn, collapsing, self-destructive mood, which unfortunately feeds a lot into suicide rates in young men. So there's a particular patterning in the 5 elements. Generally speaking, the best corrector or the best balancer of the elements is space. The more you have space as the kind of ground media, or the kind of root orientation, the other 4 can be niched inside space, because space is infinite. But if you take Earth as your position, there's not all that much you can niche inside Earth, because it's solid and resistant. And if you're hot and fiery and very reactive, because you respond so quickly, you can't really allow too much of other people into you, because they set you off. So it's quite useful just to reflect on the course of your own life and the variations of the balancing of these elements that have gone on, and how sometimes it's been very useful and sometimes it leads to real interpersonal difficulties or the collapse of relationships, because very often when people fall in love, they look for somebody who's different from them to try and find a compensation, but then you have a relationship of difference, and then it's quite difficult to find the accommodation. So just as a metaphor, it's very useful for thinking about that. But anyway, you're moving towards the death situation. So can you let go of Earth? If you've spent your life as somebody who likes to be in control, the idea that you're no longer in control of the shape of your life is very, very difficult, because you're now being shaped by circumstances. Which is why I was suggesting before lunch, when you get up and you move around, you see how your embodiment is responding to the size of the plates, the plastic spoons, and so on. And when you go outside and it's a little bit damp and chilly, how your body responds. Because the more we see responsiveness, we're more connecting with water, fire and wind, which are the moving elements. And the more you start with the assumption, but I'm like this, I'm just me, you're privileging earth. And then, of course, it's as if life is happening to us, because we're not in our responsive mode. Does that make sense? So in the preparation for death, it's seeing now the elements are dissolving. The elements are my expressive mode. They are not the truth of who I am. The truth of who I am is the inseparability of awareness and space. Yingrig Yerme, the inseparability of the spaciousness of the Dharma Dhatu and the clarity of awareness. This is the ground, indestructible quality of the mind, or sometimes referred to as Buddha nature. This expresses itself through the display of all the different patterns of the world, including the patterns of our body and how we are with other people. So that's the elements are an expressive mode, but not an essential mode. But when we don't see the ground openness, we fantasize essence in the pattern of the elements. So just as the elements are situational in their balancing and formation, so thoughts, feelings and sensations are likewise situational. But if you impute into them, this is me, this is my body, I look in the mirror, I recognize myself, this is my life, you seem to have got hold of something and now it's dissolving. So the urge to hang on can be very strong. And so if you find that you have that tilt, again and again practice dissolving, letting go. Whatever comes, comes. I'm not in charge. I'm not in charge. Very, very important. But what you have to be careful there is to find the middle way, because under the power of ignorance, we go into the domain of polarities, right, wrong, good, bad, winning, losing, and especially in control, out of control. If I'm not in control, I'm out of control. But the middle way is neither in control nor out of control. So finding that way of being, that you have to be there and be present with all the interruptions that the dynamic nature of life is. So having more awareness of that and relaxed it over the years preceding death is the best way to go about it, because you get used to letting go. It'll just be the way it is. We're not in charge. So I'm collaborating with circumstances. Neither the boss nor the slave, the collaborator, the participant. So now we're lying in the bed, the elements are dissolving and consciousness becomes fainter and fainter and fainter, very, very thin. And that's the process of dying. In the Tibetan system, as many of you will know, if you read the Tibetan Book of the Dead and so on, this is the Bardo of Dying. And when the Bardo simply means the intermediate period. So between being born and being dead, at the end you have the Bardo of Dying. And when the process of dying ends, you have the death of the body. That is to say, the mind and the body separate, and then you have the Chunyi Bardo, this intermediate period of the Dharmata, which means how things are. So this is it. And what is it? Big empty space. Nothing. Nothing to cling to, nothing is arising, just open space. Now, if you've never done any meditation, you have no experience of that. You might get a hint of it in an orgasm, or in falling asleep, or being very relaxed on a holiday, something of just here-ness with no focus on the content. But most of our lives, we're fairly fixated on the content, either external or internal. And now there is no content, and there is no barrier of internal and external. So there is presence in and as space, presence inseparable from space, which is in the tradition called the Dharmakaya. This is the mind of the Buddha. Present, but nothing there to hold on to. So it's a very pure, radiant presence. If we can't relax into that openness, then the next Bardo arises, which is the Bardo of the manifesting experience, or this, in the tradition, arises first as an array of peaceful Buddhas who are very beautiful. They're adorned in many different kinds of golden ornaments. They're shining, they're friendly, they're looking at you very sweetly. But if you don't know them and you're not connected with them and you're still in shock because you've been dying, and you're dying in Macclesfield, and there ain't too many shiny Buddhas wandering around the streets, certainly not on Friday night that I saw in the rain. So, think, what is this? And they vanish. And after they vanish, then the wrathful Buddhas arrive. And they're roaring and shouting, and they're covered in flames, and they're not very nice. And if you didn't like the nice ones, you're probably not going to like the nasty ones. So they vanish after a while, and then again it goes black, and you enter into a sort of tunnel experience, and gradually you find yourself in the situation of being reborn through an egg, or through entering into the point of copulation contact of parents and so on. So what you see there is a kind of menu of points of identification. In the first state, where there's just openness, if you're used to openness, oh, been here before. And then life stays very open. If you're not used to that, but you have some relation to the peaceful deities, which needn't necessarily be in the form of meditation deities, it's simply that there is the appearance of light and sound and color as a potential. Now the potential is arising. Can I be with that? But it's not anything, so I can't hold on to it. So if the consciousness is arising to grasp, but it can't grasp it and it vanishes, and then the wrathful ones come, which is a stronger form of potential, but I can't identify with it, and so it vanishes. And that procedure goes on until you find something you can identify with. And that capacity for identification is your karma. Some of us have the manifesting potential to have a human birth, or birth as a frog or a dog. If you're born as a human being, it could be a human being in a war zone. It could be a human being in a family which has a lot of violence and sexual abuse in it. It could be in a very beautiful, kind, loving family, in a place where food and resources come very easily. If you look around the world, the term human being doesn't really indicate very much. There are some hellish places to be born and some incredibly beautiful places to be born. So that's your particularization. So in that sense, your karma is your parents if you're going to be born with a human form. And the same would be in an animal farm, in an animal situation, because you could be born as a wild animal. You could be born as a wild animal that's a little shrew, terrified by owls, or you could be born in a factory farming situation, or in a nice open farm up on a hillside, and Heidi's coming out to see if you're all right. And there are many, many places where animals have a different life. So we start off from this assumption, I'm just me. And all that we've been looking at yesterday and today is the sense that the idea that there is a knowable essence to me is a delusion, that I arise in relation to circumstances. I was born through the arising of circumstances. All the changes of my life is due to circumstances. How I die will be due to circumstances. And what happens after that will be due to circumstances. That is to say, vectors of potential and energy formation meet together and generate the particular pattern of our lives. And this is how we find ourselves. So, preparing for death is allowing manifestation to go into emptiness and manifestation to arise from emptiness. So you have the ocean and the wave rises up and sinks back down, and rises up and sinks back down. So in lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, we manifest in a particular situation. Now, for many people, it's very difficult to imagine that they wouldn't be a human being. And it might be very difficult to imagine you wouldn't be an English-speaking human being, and you wouldn't be living in England. Imagine if you're born in America, be an American English speaker. But that wouldn't be the same, would it? That would be another kind of something. There are many, many possibilities that you could have, because you are not you. What you call you is just a title to describe the current patterning which shows itself on the basis of experiences. Today, this afternoon, there will be people experiencing life-changing injuries through car crashes on the British roads. It's raining, it's wet, some of the hill roads will be slippery with ice, there will be accidents, people will have amputations. Their life will be different. It's like that. Someone was driving out to the hills to go hill walking, and they're not going to be walking very easily on the hills again. That happens. So what we call I, me, myself is the pattern manifested through the interplay of circumstances. We are not in a war zone, but many people are. And if we go back generations, parents or grandparents were involved in war. War was declared. There was a national call-up, and people from the villages around were sent off. You can see the war memorials. They were called up and they went off to fight. And some of them came back healthy and happy, and some of them came back without arms, without eyes, and so on. Some of them were put into long-stay hospitals and never came out again. That was the karma of that time. It's gone. Now we're all healthy and happy forevermore. Maybe not. Wars can easily return. Famine can return. These accounts from Buddhism are not designed to scare us. They're just saying, don't imagine that the dynamic can be made stable. We don't know what will happen. We don't know what forces are operating. But here and now, we have a blessed opportunity to understand what is the nature of manifestation. Breathing in and out, walking, talking. Oh, this is the showing of my potential. My potential creates patterns which I hold on to as being indicators of me, but when I look for me, what do I find? So, one way we can inquire into this more is we relax in the open practice, and then we take up these familiar 5 questions. Where does the mind come from? Where does it stay? Where does it go to? Does it have any shape and color? Does it have any size and dimension? We're not talking about something theoretical or abstract. We are here because we have a mind. Our thoughts arising in our mind have brought us to meet together in this setting. The thoughts that arose in our mind that brought us here were illuminated because they manifest in the luminous sphere of the mind. That is to say, we know we're having these thoughts, we go with these thoughts. What is this mind? The Buddha says the mind is chief. The mind is the most important. So what is our mind? We become concerned with our thoughts, with our feelings, with our plans, with our summer holidays, with all kinds of things. We become concerned. We become concerned with the content of life. But what is the pot? What is the container? The mind. We've got one. What is it? So this is vital. So excuse me. We just sit, relax and open, and then very gently allow this question to arise. Where does my mind come from? Now, you might have all sorts of solutions arising to that. My mind came from my parents. My mind came from this or that. Don't start a big conceptual investigation. Whatever thought arises as the solution, just stay present with it and see what happens. So we're just very gently looking, here I am. What is this mind which is my presence? Any thoughts or questions about that before we begin? Okay. So we should raise these questions in a very gentle manner. It's not something that you can investigate very strongly, because otherwise you set up a subject who is looking and an object that is looked for. But the mind is not an object. In fact, of course, the awareness is never an object of consciousness. So you can't look like a detective or a research scientist, but rather it's about putting yourself in the way of the showing of awareness through you. Just as the light and clarity of the mirror shows itself through the reflection. It's the luminosity, the clarity of our own mind which illuminates the issue. The ego thinks it has a light, an investigatory light, a Sherlock Holmes kind of light that can analyze things and pull them apart and see what's there. But that's not the light that will show you the open ground nature. Because clearly thoughts have some kind of origin. They certainly have a beginning, a middle and an end. So do feelings, sensations, memories. They arise and then they're gone. But the mind, does it arise? If it arises, does it arise from somewhere? This is not theory. This is your own existence. This is the ground of your being, which is here prior to everything else. And if we don't find that, all we have is the clouds in the sky and never the sky. Now, if we keep that image, you cannot have clouds without the sky. So even when your mind is very cloudy, the very fact of the clouds is the proof of the sky. So don't try to get rid of the clouds. Find the sky with the clouds. When you look in the mirror, you see the reflection. You don't see the mirror, but you couldn't see the reflection without the mirror. So again, it's never either or. As soon as you go into either or polarization, you've got your scissors out and you cut a line down the middle. The appearance, even if it's a very foggy or dull or heavy appearance, is the showing of the manifesting energy of the mind. So the mind is there, because this is its showing. So what is that? Is it a thing? Does it have a color? Does it have a shape? You have to be with it and let it show that through you. And whenever you come to a conclusion about it, you don't have to say this is right or this is wrong. You just stay with the conclusion. And if the conclusion is conceptual, it will vanish. But if it's a direct experience, it will remain there, because that is the clarity of the mind illuminating the mind. Does that make sense? Because if you have a torch, the torch illuminates the non-torch. The torch doesn't illuminate itself because the light is radiating out from it. So we're used to the rational light of our ego self, which tells us about everything except the one who is looking. It tells us about the things in the world. So what we're doing here is to find the effortlessly arising intrinsic illumination of the mind itself. Because this is what is revealed at the point of death, when everything goes blanked out. There is no content, but there is a mirror without content. There is a sky without content. This is why the primordial Buddha of this lineage, Samantabhadra or Kuntuzangpo, the always good, is represented as naked and very dark blue in color. Naked because there's no ornamentation, there's no clouds, there's no covering, there's no reflection, it's just open. And it's dark blue because it's almost oblivion. If you go out on a dark night, there's no differentiation. You can't say there is this and then that. It's just open. So this is the ground, open nature. And then within that, you have everything which you're familiar with. Any points you want to raise, or any questions you have about what we've looked at so far?
During this sort of meditation, if it's a good day, I can recognise thoughts coming, and I can recognise emotions coming out. But what I can't ever escape from is the commentary. Now, is that commentary just another thought, because it doesn't seem like it seems in a different order?
Well, the commentary is death. The commentary is what kills off the life. Because what you've got is the moment by moment arising, and then you've got this split, this sort of metacognition or overarching cognition that's running a little story about it, evaluating good, bad, should do more, should do less, why are they like that, and all the rest of it. So it's a kind of splits you internally. And of course it's a commentary that we run outside as well, going down the street, thinking about people, thinking about what they do. Commentary is how the ego establishes itself. For years and years and years, when my mum lived in her last house, and I would go home, she would start a commentary on the people who parked their cars in front of her house. It was a little semi-detached house on quite a quiet road. And when I was a kid, there was almost no cars there. And then over the years, more and more cars came. Now, she didn't have a car. She was very old. But she said, that's my garden. That's the pavement. That's the road. That's my bit of road. Why are they parking there? And she could go off on this and that. She said, wow, all these thoughts about that. And that she would get preoccupied with that kind of thing, and what people were doing and what they weren't doing. And then we recognize, my God, I'm doing the same thing. I won't leave it alone. It's just a fact. This has happened. But somehow we enter into judgment. We take up a position in relation to our own experience. Does that seem to connect with what you're saying? Well, it's a splitting. And so what you've got is focus and distraction happening simultaneously. So one of the simple ways of dealing with it is to do more of this Shine practice, focusing on the breath. Because that, if you can keep staying on the breath, you're taking the fuel out of the commentary. Firstly, because there's not much you can say about your breath. It's pretty boring. And secondly, because you're coming back again and again to simplicity. Now, although that practice is very simple to describe, it's very difficult for most of us to do because of the power of the commentary. When I say the commentary is death, I mean it's the death of awareness. It's the main cover-up, because it is the undermining of the simplicity of the first presentation. So, coming back always to the simplicity. For example, say you're in a bit of an agitated state and you go to the movies or you switch something on the telly. You can be running a stream of commentary either about something else or about the movie you're watching. But if you're in a very tuned in state and you're watching a movie and you get the movie and the movie gets you, you're right in there. Would that seem right? Yeah, it's a really good movie or a really good novel, and it's got your attention. You're absorbed in it. So that gives us a clue. I get more commentary when I'm less committed to what's going on. Does that seem right? Because if I'm fully with whatever it is, whether it was playing golf or tennis or doing gardening or cooking, if you're right in there, there's less commentary.
I'm talking about specifically meditating now.
Okay. But it's the same thing, because if you've got the habit of running commentary all the time in your mind, when you come to meditation, it's going to be the same. So it's about one-pointed attention, whatever we're doing. And the danger for us is our automatic pilot. Because many of the activities in our life we can do with our eyes closed. So you walk down the street and you don't need to think about where your feet are going. So you're mindless but full of mental stuff. So it's that habitual formation which comes as the commentary in the meditation. So the exit is mindfulness, whether it's mindfulness of the breath or mindfulness of the body in walking, or mindfulness of a visualization, but it's to gather all of one's mental energy and focus it in one direction. Because the commentary is the splitting off of aspects, almost like a pinball machine that's setting off all these lights.
So then you get fixated, and that's fine, because it blocks the commentary.
Yeah.
But you have to relax at some point. You can't.
Yeah, that's right. But, of course, if you at first, staying focused is effortful. But actually, you're just resting your mind on the breath. So it's only effortful because we're being carried away by the current of thoughts at first. Like a swimmer in the sea and the tide's going out and you're swimming against the tide, trying to hold on. But once you get used to being settled, you're just settled. And it's not effortful. And then you have the same clarity through the course of the day. Whatever's going on, you're just there. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask about karma, because I always feel a bit uncomfortable when it seems to be implied that if you were born in a war zone or if you've been sexually abused, it's somehow your fault because of your previous actions in previous lives. And just wondered what your thoughts were on that.
Okay. Well, karma as a notion is about cause and effect. It's not about blaming or denigrating or making somebody guilty. So, let's say, first of all, that you're born in a place where there's a lot of killing going on. It's not your fault, because let's say Mary is born in a village in Afghanistan and there are bombs going off and there's landmines. So we'll call her Mary. Here's Mary. This is the consequence of actions which were previously done by whom? It wasn't Mary. So what we call Mary is the arising of the patterning of energetic patterns generated somewhere else, because we're always showing patterning. Patterning is how the world manifests, leaves, trees, raindrops, and so on. So the fact that someone has emerged from a mother's body in this village and is taking on this identity of a young girl, this is a blossoming forth of various causal forces. Now, life is getting bad in that village, and maybe bad things will happen to Mary. Did Mary make the bad things happen to her? If I walk outside and it's raining, I get wet. Am I making myself wet? The rain is not making me wet in the sense of having any intention. As far as we know, there are not, in the First World War, people used to say, well, there's a bullet with my name on it, and that's the only one that can kill me. Now, are there raindrops with James written on them, and these are the ones that land on me? Maybe not. It's just raining. So the rain isn't intending to wet me. I'm becoming wet through being in the rain. But it's the attribution of responsibility. So, is this a punishment for Mary? It's much more neutral than that. It's saying, due to causes and conditions, this is where we find ourselves. And if things are good, we shouldn't take pride and say, oh, I'm a wonderful person, look at my life. This is this incredible rejoicing that seemed to happen in competitive sport about 25 years ago. Somebody scores a goal and then they're, and everybody's lifting them up. Madness. It's a wee rubber ball or a leather ball and they're kicking it about and you got it in a wee shape and hey, I did this. I did this. And then you look at the slow motion replay. Due to causes and circumstances, I did this. The fact that I'm quite healthy, the fact that I've been training, the fact that somebody kicked the ball at the right angle and I was able to get my head there, the fact that the goalkeeper's a wee bitty slow, I scored the goal. So we have a strong tendency to condense cause into what a wonderful person. And all the other background features are removed. So the overemphasis on agency, which is very, very powerful now, leads us into, I think, making somebody guilty of something bad happens. So we're born and we have a certain health in our body or certain ailments. We have a certain intelligence that helps us do well or not do well. This is the ripening of our potential according to the circumstances around us. Now, other people can say, you're very disruptive in the class, and therefore you are a bad person. So in the school I went to, we got beaten a lot. Teacher always had their belt out, whacking it on the desk. You, come here, whack, whack, whack. 6 of the best, whack, 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 fuck off. Very, very unpleasant. Why did that happen? Because it was allowed at that time. You couldn't really say, I'm being abused at school. They'd say, well, don't be rude to your teacher. Now they would say to the teacher, oh, you abused the child. In those days, they say, well, you brought it on yourself. Don't be cheeky to the teacher. Do what the teacher says. So these are cultural formations about how you understand why something happens. The fact is, something is happening, and we are implicated in it, but it's, as it were, not our fault. Fault doesn't, because of the complexity of causal forces, to attribute sole responsibility for this event to that person would be very bad. Well, the reason you were raped was because you went out on a night in a very short skirt with high heels. Well, you were asking for it. It's not so long ago that judges could say that with impunity. So that was a notion of, if you provoke men, they're likely to do that. So as the culture changes, different kinds of explanation of the patterning of causal forces arises. So I think one should just be observing many vectors pass through me. Because I can be a bit dull, I often don't see all the options, and I often don't carefully consider what choices I have, because I've gone into an automated response, and so I find myself repeating something. Does that make sense? So a lot of the time when we do get in trouble, it's because we participate through not clocking it. So I think karma is, it certainly has no value in terms of saying something like, you brought it on yourself. That would have no meaning. What it's saying is, once the game of samsara begins, the game doesn't stop. That's the scary bit. So in the Tibetan we are called drowa, which means goers. We're traveling people. We're born into a game, the game of our family, the game of our school, our culture, and we move in that. Then we die, and then we're in another game, then we're in another game. We're always in some kind of game with so many variables going on that we're kind of buffeted around, and we've got some agency, and some of the time it's all happening to us. And that's why they say it's like the ocean of samsara. You know, if you go out in a wee boat and you go over the horizon, suddenly you think, oh, it's just water. Everywhere it's just water. And that's what the Buddha's saying. Look around, it's just water. There's nobody sorted here. We're all at sea. So if you want to find freedom, find the ground or the basis for the waves. Where is the ocean? You wouldn't have waves without the ocean. But as long as you stay in the movement of the ocean and you're trying to sort it out and say, well, it's all your fault, it's all my fault, whose fault is it? Well, it must be hers. That's what we do in the attribution, and it just makes more and more turbulence. So in a sense, what karma is saying is, this is a field of interconnectivity, and every move you make sets up some other movement pattern. But if you say, well, there's good people and bad people, that's not an understanding of karma. And if you say that this thing that happened to you is entirely your own fault, that's not karma's understanding either. Much more, karma is to say, life is very complicated. If you imagine that it's simple, you're going to have a hard time. Don't make it overcomplicated. Don't frighten yourself about the complication. How can you deal with very complex variables? If you over-fixate on one, it's not going to work. You've got to keep a broad spectrum perspective and allow yourself to move with the various currents that are operating. Would that seem right? But it just keeps going. That's the thing, it just keeps going. And certainly when I encountered Tibetan people in India, just after a lot of them were being forced to flee from Tibet, you didn't see any big blaming of the Chinese. You know, you saw lots of people doing their practice, living very simply, and it was just, well, these things happen, that's happened, now where are we? Now where are we? And I think that's the really important thing, and in some way that's like a sea anchor, you know, like a little ship would have. The anchor chain is not long enough to go to the bottom of the sea, but it drags with the current and stabilizes the boat a bit. So we continue with the practice in the midst of these fluctuations, and life keeps moving, but we're not so just blown hither and thither. But certainly karma should never be used to blame people. And of course in India, in the caste system, it was often turned into a way of saying, oh, these untouchables, they brought it on themselves, it's their fault. And if you help them, you're getting in the way of the purification of their karma. All kind of nonsense can be said then. Does that speak to your question?
Yes, yeah, that's what I was sort of thinking in that example. But yeah, no, that's a nice way of explaining it. Just making you feel comfortable with your answer.
So if we take these two principles, there's stillness and there's movement, And according to the tradition, these two are inseparable. It's never only going to be still. There's always going to be movement, because movement is the breath or the life or the radiance of the stillness. So when you experience karma when you lose the stillness, and you've only got this endless movement. So if you try to rearrange the patterns of manifestation, it's very exhausting and you'll never be successful. Not because you're weak or useless or stupid, but it's just too complicated. So what we have to do is to integrate or see the unborn integration between the stillness and the movement, and rest in the stillness as the movement is occurring. And then there's much more spaciousness in the moment of the emergence.
So James, is it in a sense the delusion of seeing a self within those patterns that's liberated in this life? So that by recognising the ground nature or the open awareness, that delusion of there being something called me is liberated. But the pattern itself, the consequences of this life, carry on energetically to something.
That's right. That's right. The patterns keep going on and on. And if you can see that what we call the self is the name that we give to the pattern, rather than being the source or the cause of the pattern, it's if you like, the result of the pattern or the label that we put on the pattern, then it's very different. I'm like this means essentially this is how I find myself to be, because I come after the event. So when you buy a shirt, the last thing done in the making of the shirt was to stitch the little label on. You don't start with a label and then make the shirt.
So yesterday's questions again about kind of rebirth and the idea of taking ownership and the idea of me being reborn. They're just illusory ideas as well.
That's right.
That put onto these things. But in a sense, it occurred earlier that in a sense the compassionate thing in this life is to deal with your patterns so that the energetic karma that I create in this life, how it surfaces later, will be of benefit, rather than just thinking, well, I can do what the hell I want in this life, because actually there is no me anyway.
Well, the last thing would be generally seen as quite a delusion, because one thing that's often said is if you can't manage the causal situation, it's unlikely that you'll manage the consequential situation. So I can do whatever I like, absolutely fine. But when the consequences of that start to come back, then it will be very difficult. And that's why war, again, is a very terrible time, because in war, many people feel free to do what they like, to do mass murders, rapes, burnings, and so on. And then afterwards, it's very different, because they've done that. That doesn't leave them. And that stays in their social, biological continuum, and it will manifest for them as they move into other situations.
But not necessarily in this life. It's like an energetic thing.
Yeah.
Later.
Yeah.
I can't get my head around the fact that when you die, you go with the Bardo, and what you're describing about confusion seems to imply a certain, an awareness. So if it's not me anymore, what is that awareness? Maybe it's been answered already.
Okay, so if we go back to these two notions of I, there's I as the clarity of the mirror, and there's the I as the patterning of the reflection. Yeah? So there's me as James, born in Scotland, did this and this. I've got the whole narrative of who I am and what I've done and so forth. That's these patterns in the mirror. And then there's just a basic here-ness, not even a here I amness, but just here, that basic presence. Now when we die, all the constructed pattern stories of this life start to dissolve. So sometimes it's said like a rainbow in the sky. When a rainbow's fading, it's there. Oh, and then you can't find it anymore. It's just vanished. So all these patterns of your life start to thin out and fade and are gone. But the mirror is still there. But the mirror is you as presence, but not you as person. So it's a peculiar thing. We have a personal I and an impersonal I, if you like. And the impersonal I is me because present, but not present as me, not present as anything, just presence or pure presence or open presence, which reveals something if there is something to be revealed. So at that point of death, when you enter into the first Bardo, there's nothing to be revealed. So it's just the open, empty mirror. So if you're used to that, then, oh, it's just there. And then patterns start to arise, and, well, you're used to that the mind is empty and then the mind is full. But it's when we've been clinging on to the patterns as who I really am, it's always the middle way. It's not who I really am, but I would be mad to say my patterns aren't my patterns. So they're definitional of my emergence, but they're not definitional of any essence or core which is enduring.
So are you saying that they're not carried over then? That karmic element is not carried over in that presence or awareness goes somehow, I don't even know how to say, but goes forward into some other manifestation?
If you've got £100 in £10 notes, you take it to the bank, you put it in, you go back after a month and you say, I'd like my £100 back, they'll give you £100, but they won't give you the same notes. So you've got your karmic structure, you've got your £100. When you die, it goes into the big bank of emptiness. You come out the other side, that'll be it. So in the next life, the teller pays you out £100, but it's in a different form. It's still energy, but it's not yours in the sense, because it's always this idea that when I die, I will be reborn. This is when we use this language, you're always starting from the assumption that there is an essential self. And Buddhism is saying that what we call ourselves is open and empty and manifesting. And the manifesting patterns are described in ordinary language, in the sort of shorthand that we use, to be me. But there is no essence to the me. So it's not that what my karma is going to be carried over to another life, because karma is the activity patterning which will manifest in another way. But is it the same person or different? And I think in the Tibetan tradition, with this development of reincarnate lamas, it became a great confusion, because there's this idea that people can remember previous lives and know exactly what they're doing. And that may be the case for some of them, I don't know. But it's like a literary trope. Once you had the development of Gothic novels, you know, then the Castle of Otranto, and then Frankenstein and so on, then you get lots and lots of novels following the same way, because it's a genre. And genres encourage, you know, the development, like rom-com movies and girl journey movies, 4 girls together on the scam, you know, off they go. It's like, once you got a shape, you whack anything into it. So what does it mean to be a reincarnation? Carne, back in the meat again? But the Tibetan word is trulku, which means emanation. So if they're an emanation, it shows the form of a human being, but it's not really meat. But as Shylock says, if you cut me, do I not bleed? So, what is the status of people? These are social conventions, power conventions. They are ways of dealing with the transmission of the ownership of monasteries, with the ownership of land. These are complex anthropological phenomena, one bandwidth of which is a spiritual transmission, but they've got many other factors going on as well. So we say, oh, this person is the reincarnation of that person. But where's the person? As soon as you say that, then it's all gone wrong, because there isn't a person. There is a radiance. If the person is really radiant, that's marvelous. So radiance can feed into radiance, can feed into radiance, as it does for all of us. It's the solidification, essentialization that makes it go in the wrong direction. Because then people can start to think, oh yes, well we know who that person is. But the Dharmakaya is unknowable. So who is it that you know?
I was just reflecting that with reincarnation sometimes still, there's evidence that people recognise things from their previous existence. So, sure we know recognising it too. So how does that connect? I mean, how does that work into the scheme?
I don't know. No idea. No idea. Why do some boys get a scholarship to Eton and have their life transformed? Some tulkus are from rich, powerful families and some are from poor families. But if they get recognised, it's the same as going to Eton and Oxford. A new game plan opens for their existence. You get special tutoring, special clothes, special food, special initiations and so on. They're on a privileged track, which could be good or could be a socio-political formation.
But the reason they got to that place of being privileged is because ostensibly they recognise things that belong to them in past life and people that they're connected with.
Well, that's a story. The first formal one was Dusum Khenpa, the second Karmapa. And as soon as that lineage developed, all the others went with it. It's a genre. It's a way of seeing the world. It didn't happen in Burma, it didn't happen in China, it didn't happen in many, many places, it happened in Tibet.
And in India it happens, as you were mentioning this.
Pardon?
In India, yesterday you mentioned the children who remember.
Yeah, some people remember something. If it gives people faith, then maybe it's very helpful. It's certainly a way of organizing education. Tulku got 1,000 hours of education. The nuns next to the monastery got none. None, zero, zilch, nada. So, I'm a little bit suspicious. I was originally an anthropologist, so I have a particular eye about these. I would, pure or impure, these are matters of faith. If you have faith, as the tradition says, even a dog's tooth will give out light. But to say that someone is this person and therefore they're pure and holy, there's a fair bit of evidence that that may not be true. And that for the sake of money and privilege, people will tell all sorts of lies. All that glitters is not gold. And it doesn't really matter, because whether there's one Karmapa or 2 Karmapas or 10 Karmapas, that won't help you find your mind. And when you die, knowing who is the real Karmapa won't really help you. But if you know your own mind, that will be very helpful. Because if you know your own mind, you can't be led astray. But if you don't know your own mind, all you have are thoughts, opinions, feelings, things you've heard, things you've learned. You're constructing houses on the basis of received ideas, received information. And you could be deeply misled by that. Deeply misled. The uncle of my main teacher was a great chod practitioner. And when chod's a particular practice that you do for dealing with troublesome energies around. And part of the practice is that you carry a human skin. And a human skin, when it's dried out, weighs 15, 20 kilos sometimes. It's oiled to keep it soft. And in the course of the practice, he would beat the patient with the skin. So you're lying in bed, you're very sick, and here's this guy dancing with a big drum and whacking you with a leather skin till the blood's coming out of your mouth. These sort of exorcisms would not be allowed in the West. They're not allowed. We don't live in a world of exorcism, but exorcism was quite strong in Tibetan Buddhism. These are cultural readings of causes and effect. When the great lamas get sick, they're not going for exorcism, they're going to America for cancer treatment in very expensive hospitals. So one should be very clear. Clarity is the main thing. Emptiness, clarity, compassionate, non-dual participation. There are many, many stories that you can believe in, and they may be helpful or they may not be helpful. But if you close your eyes and think that that will help you see the truth, you're probably misled. Okay, any other things you want to raise?
You talked earlier about when you dissolve, when you're dying, it dissolves back into the mirror, using the analogy of the mirror. So, I'm getting this right. So, the ground mirror that goes back into the, well, goes back into the...
Doesn't go anywhere, it never moves.
Okay, but is one person's ground mirror, absent of the sense of self, the same as another person's? Is there some analogy in their individuality, albeit without the me, I, or is it a great, huge mirror and you just go back into the big mirror?
There's only one mirror. There's only one Dharmakaya. All Dharmakayas are the same. You don't have an individual Dharmakaya. You have individual Sambhogakaya and Nirmanakaya, but you don't have individual Dharmakaya.
So in terms of karma, then there's no individual karma, because if it's back, the awareness goes back into that presence. That's the presence that's beyond any boundaries of self or other. So when it remanifests, goes through the Bardo and remanifests, and it's attracted back into a life.
You become someone.
Yeah, but it's not, there's no relationship at all to the particular karma that grew up in the deluded state of life as we know it.
Well, when we were kids, if you found a coin or something in the street, you used to say, losers, weepers, finders, keepers. Now, in some places, samsara, finders, weepers. You find yourself in a situation, and you find yourself feeling that you are you. Now, you are you as a manifesting energy formation, but the you-ness of you as the problematic of an ego identification is held in place because of the absence of clarity of the ground. Yeah? So it's like being an orphan. For whatever reason, your mum vanished and you've been adopted. And you're adopted into a family, I don't know, of Catholics, but your mum's a Protestant. And so you grow up thinking you're a Catholic. And then after many, many years, you meet your mum and she says, oh, what are you going in that church for? That's the wrong church. You come with me. The Archbishop of Canterbury's a good man. Now you get back in the right church so you know who you are. Who you took yourself to be through being adopted was a helpful identification because you were lost, you were an orphan, you had nothing, and you got this secondary identification, which was not original, but it was functional. And if you never find your real mum, That's all you'll have. Does that make sense? And your real mum is the great mother, the mother of all the Buddhas, which is Prajnaparamita, which means emptiness, Dharmakaya. So if you don't find your own ground, the empty basis of the mirror-like mind, then all you have is your adoptive home. Your mum, your dad, your school, your siblings, and so on. And they create this identity which you inhabit, during which you do this and that and create your karma, and then you die. And then again you get adopted by circumstances within which you feel this is me. But you don't know your real mother. You don't know your real source. Where do I come from? That's why these 5 questions are used in all the meditation traditions. Where does the mind come from? Where does the mind stay? Where does it go to? Does it have a color? Does it have a shape? Does it have a dimension, a size? Because everything you see in the world has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has some sort of shape or formation, something you can say about it as a color. There are the houses in the town, some are made of brick, some are made of stone, and so on. So we can say something about all the phenomena we experience in the world, but can we say the same about the mind? Is the mind part of the formation of energy, or is it other? Which is why we ask these questions, and you look again and again and again, and then you see. But if you don't see, all you have is your thoughts, and your thoughts will bind you into this second order of identification. And on one level, of course, that is very scary. If you believe in just one lifetime, life's much easier. This is saying this is an endless game. It doesn't end until you get out of it. And the exit is inside you already, but you keep looking in the wrong way. Like the Buddha himself said, all sentient beings want happiness, but they use all their time and energy to increase confusion. Why would we do this? Because whoever says your mind is empty, I mean, a school teacher might when they throw a bit of chalk at you, but generally speaking, they're not explaining that from the very beginning your mind is unborn. Whoever says that? Nobody on the telly. It's very unusual, which is why these traditions have been maintained for a long, long time in Tibet. People thought these were extremely important because they open the door to something you can't see. It's the gateless gate. It's the entry into the ground of being, which is not an idea.
This cosmic bag, the 10 quid that went in one end, when it comes out then it could be 20, it could be in yen, it could be in something else. It's not particular.
That's right.
Even though it's different notes, it could be actually, you could be in beans.
Yeah, exactly.
So the bag, the mirror, it's a universal mirror. It's not my personal ground being.
It's yours as presence. It's yours as presence, but not as possession. Yeah. Well, if I was to take a pair of scissors and cut your nose off, you would be upset. I think we can agree with that. That you have a certain committed identification with your nose. Okay, I'll trim carefully. Got a new career here, Dharma surgery. So this is your body, your precious body, the body you want to keep healthy and relaxed and comfortable till you die. So this is our identification. But when we look for the mind, it's not like that. It's a different order. It is other. We say, I'm self, you are other than me. But that's a small other. The otherness of the mind is a radical, big O other. It's whoa, it's not like anything else. And yet it is our presence. So that's the unique breakthrough or transformation which arises. And that presence, like the mirror, is a showing. And it can show any of the possible formations of the world. And that's the scary bit, that indeed in another life I could be born as a sheep. And as the text say, even if you go to a cow and you say, "O mani pe mi hung ri," cow doesn't get anything, just a moo. To be born as an animal is to be at the mercy of the people who own you, or if you're a wild animal, to be at the mercy of predators, and you have no way of conditioning your mind because your life is largely instinctual. So to have a human birth is an amazing thing. To have a precious human birth in which you have access to some understanding that your mind is not what you think it is, it's not constructed out of thoughts, that makes it very, very rare and precious. And we have this opportunity. Any other thoughts, questions, opinions?
Can I ask if you're dying and for whatever reason you end up under the influence of heavy drugs?
Yeah.
Presumably that wouldn't affect your clarity when you go into the Bardo, because we're not talking about like the mind that could, that can become confused by medication.
Well, it would depend on your practice. If you are used to being present with your own confusion, so when you sit in the meditation and your mind is very heavy and dull, and you, without entering into a judgment about it being heavy and dull, you just stay present with it. Big stupid, here I am. But except it's shiny stupid. So there's a shiny presence with a big dull stupid. Then, if you could do that and keep the clarity there, then when you die, if you're under the power of heavy sedation, you could probably maintain some clarity. But if when your mind gets heavy and dull, you fall asleep, probably not. Because you collapse into the sinking. The key instruction is don't merge with what's arising and don't try to avoid it. Stay present with it. With it means that they're non-dual, that is to say they're not two, but they're not one either. They're neither two nor one, but non-dual. So if you have that practice, that would help. But generally speaking, if you die in an operating theatre, there's not much clarity there. Okay, shall we take a break and then maybe 20 minutes and then we'll come back and do some more practice.